Warning, this podcast may contain bad language and content that some listeners may find offensive and difficult to write down.
Jiminy Jillikers, Cleaves. I think we've got a guest.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared for that. I don't really know what to do with it either.
Welcome to Seesaw Podcast with your hosts, T and Cleaves.
Every week, bringing some much-needed balance and humour to brighten up what can sometimes be a dark, disabled world.
Welcome back to Seesaw, the home of Seesaw. All content to do with Seesaw, apart from actually seesaws. Cleaves, how's things?
It's yeah, I'm all good. Ready for this ep. How about you?
Not too bad. Got a guest. And I'm not going to introduce the guest now because that's done at the start of the episode. So why waste breath?
Let's hope that does happen, otherwise this is going to be kind of awkward.
I am pretty sure it does.
Let me feel the static.
Hello everyone and welcome back. Of course, I am here, T. And because we're doing this now, I am wearing a grey turtleneck jumper and a black Under Armour hat. And of course we have Cleaves.
Hello. Today wearing grey and white plaid shirt and black jeans.
Great. I didn't say what jeans I'm wearing, but they're black.
No one cares.
But of course, we are joined by a guest, as I said. And this week, we are joined by Braille proofreader and published author, Macy Lewis. Hi.
Hey, guys.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Very good. Very good.
Do you like my wardrobe choice right now, what I'm wearing?
If you're comfortable saying so.
Of course. So, I'm wearing jeans. They're lighter denim. And then I have on a sweatshirt, and it's yellow and orange, and I think there's some red in there too. It's tie-dye.
Nice. Much more interesting than my grey turtleneck.
And I just haven't got changed from work.
I usually like, gray and black. Sometimes I'll venture into the bright colors.
It sounds like you're smashing it today with the bright colours. So, of course, as I said, yeah, published author. 5 books up to this point, isn't it?
Yes.
Wonderful, including the Hidden Heart series, and you've done a few children's books as well, so covering a bit of a spectrum there.
Yes, definitely.
Before we get started, are you happy to sort of give yourself a very quick intro and, if you're comfortable, your disability?
Absolutely. So I was adopted when I was 1 day old, and I was born 17 weeks early at 23 weeks gestation, and I weighed 1 pound 2 ounces. So in my first year of life, to make this very brief because it's extremely complicated, in my first year of life, I had 11 surgeries, and 10 of those surgeries were on my eyes. And those eye surgeries were attempts to stop my retinas from detaching. But my right eye never responded, so I can't see anything out of it. My left eye responded just a little bit. And so I have about 10% central vision in that eye. And my eye condition is retinopathy of prematurity.
Growing up with a visual impairment must have been, quite tricky, obviously, like through education stuff. Do you want to touch on that at all?
So when I was growing up, I went to the Utah School for the Blind from preschool, which is a nursery school for all of my friends over across the pond, until 2nd grade when I mainstreamed into public school. So that'd be elementary school or grade school for everybody. Yep. And then from there, I went through, we have elementary school, junior high, and then graduated from high school. And then from there, I went to the University of Utah, where I graduated with my bachelor's in history and a minor in writing and rhetoric studies.
Amazing. Why history? What drove you to that?
Well, I was originally thinking I wanted to be a lawyer. And with the lawyer, the history degree kind of went in hand. But I didn't do that because the economy had tanked about the time I was thinking about applying for law school. And I wasn't sure if I should continue on with that path. So I just thought, get the history degree. And then in the meantime, this writing and rhetoric studies minor came out. And I thought, go for that too, because it's a fancy way of saying I took more writing classes. It was more like business writing and analyzing writing, so not really creative writing, but I had always been drawn to the creative writing stuff in school. So if the teachers were like, hey, write a story or a poem or something about this, I was down for that. Where if it was something like math, which I wasn't very good at, I was kind of like, okay, I'll try. Not very good, but I prefer, writing and drawing versus mathematics, which I wasn't very good at.
When you were at university, were you doing a lot of creative writing in your spare time, or was it just sort of within your classes?
If I had spare time, I would mainly what I was doing was I was writing down ideas and just keeping them in a file on my computer. And I really wouldn't do anything with them because I was just like, I don't have time to really work on these, but I'll save them for a future. Although I did so back in high school, I had gone to a concert it was an Elton John concert. And I had this idea for like, hey, what if there was this girl who was in about my age and she went to this rock concert and the rock star ended up being her dad, kind of like a Steven Tyler, Liv Tyler type thing. But I didn't know their story at the time. I'd never heard of it. Yeah. So I started writing that, and I did work on that during college, just, finished it up, and oh my gosh, when I read it today, I just laugh because I'm like, you can totally tell I was like in that teenage phase of like, just being a teenager, and so it makes me laugh every time I read it.
I haven't really done much writing in my past, but certain things I tried to do, projects I'd look back on, I'm just like, what were you thinking? Like, you were absolutely mad. Like, what were you doing?
Exactly. It's so true.
I was in a teenage band, and some of those songs are an absolute travesty.
I was in a band too.
Oh, yeah.
That's a cover band. So we didn't really do a lot of our own songs. It was just like everybody else's songs that we did.
At least you know they were good.
Right. Well, I like to think they were good. My parents and the other parents of the band thought they were good. Our high school friends thought they were good. So I don't know. Maybe they were good.
What did you do in the band?
I am a drummer and a singer.
Awesome. So you went to university, got your bachelor's in history, and what happened then? Like, what was the next stage?
Okay, so the next stage was I did like 2 years of volunteer work for my church, and there I was interviewing blind church members internationally. So I had a couple from England and all over the world, and I was just basically interviewing about their lives. So like, what would they want to share their story, like their blindness conditions, their any other thing that they wanted to share, and just their testimonies in God and stuff. And while I was on that mission, I met my mentor and I interviewed her, and she was blind, obviously, and she was an author, and I was just kind of like, whoa, I never knew of any blind authors really that I had known in my personal circle. Yeah. So I asked her if I could keep in touch, and I told her, I was like, hey, I'm like working on this manuscript. I said, could I contact you when I'm done with it, and would you mind helping me out? Because I don't know what I'm doing. She goes, sure. So while I was doing all that volunteer work, I was writing this manuscript, and it was something that I had kind of thought of in college when I was writing those ideas down in that computer file. Yeah. And I just left it alone. And the main idea was there was this doctor who was going to go to Africa to help with some kind of service thing, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I tried a few different scenarios and they just didn't work. Well, the Ebola epidemic came out, and I started researching it, and I thought I could do something with this. And so I wrote this manuscript. It was really well researched. My mentor actually said when she was reading some of it, she goes, your writing sounds like a research paper. And that's not bad. She goes, that's not a bad thing. But she goes, we've got to teach you how to write like a novelist. And I was like, well, I don't know how to do that. So when I finished it, and I sent her the first 10 pages. That's usually what editors will have you do. So they can look at what you've written, and then they can edit it for you, and just you can see if you're going to work well together. So she took a look and was like, well, it's okay. And I said, honestly, I'm really embarrassed because I knew that it was sappy. Yeah. And I was like, there's this one part in this big manuscript where it was about this service trip that I wrote about this doctor who goes to Africa and helps with the Ebola epidemic. And it was like maybe 3 or 4 pages. And I said, that is honestly one of my favorite things, but I just glossed over it. And she said, well, take that and write a whole new book about it. And I was like, okay, there goes 2 years down the drain. Like, oh, and I was like, well, sure, but I don't know what I'm doing. And she goes, well, no worry, I'll help you. And I was like, are you serious? And she goes, absolutely. She goes, I believe in helping other people when you've got the tools to do it, and I know how to do it. So let me help you. So basically, for the next 6 months, I became her mentee or apprentice, and we wrote a new book together, and she coached me on how to write dialogue, how to, properly build characters and then build the world that they live in, and then how to, the grammar rules that nobody looks at, and the dialogue rules that nobody looks at except if you're an author and you have to pay attention to those things. And I couldn't believe that she was like, yeah, here, let's work on this. And I mean, there were days where I was like, this is great, I'm learning. There were days where I was like, why am I even doing this? Like, is this worth it? And she was always just like, you're doing better than you think you are. And she goes, I wouldn't do this if I didn't see you have the discipline to learn and take what I tell you and apply it.
Yeah, what was your end game on that then? Was the end game to get published and have other people read it?
Yes.
Oh, always. Yeah. Okay.
I think I chose the genre of writing because of my mentor, because that's what she wrote. She had published 2 books at the time. And I read them and I was like, oh, I like this. So my genres are romantic suspense, because I like romantic stuff. Like, I'm a girl. We like romance, right?
Yeah.
But if there's not a lot of action, I've discovered as I've read tons and tons of books, I get really bored. Yeah. And so for me, I'm like, I've got to have the romance, but I've got to have the action, and I can't just have, no offense to, what was her name, who wrote Pride and Prejudice? Jane Austen. You're going to the dances, but can we have some like war or something going on? Yeah. So for me to be entertained, I was just like, I've got to do where there's girly romance and then action and violence. So okay. I don't know.
Nice mix. Of course, like you got to writing your first book, and obviously it must be a success for you to want to do more. But as far as sort of like your process, of course, you had this story in mind, but like how was it actually writing, like the actual putting it all together?
Firstly, how did you write? Did you write on a computer? Did you write with like a Braille notepad?
It was all just computer.
Okay.
I was writing on the computer. I'm heavily into research. That's just the historian in me taking over, where I was like, I kind of told myself that, well, actually I was in college, in university, when getting this history degree, and I was thinking at the very end, man, if I could write a book and research something on it, I would love to do that. And then I was thinking, yeah, right, like that'll ever happen. And trying to keep the dream real, reality. And so when I went into this, I just, promised myself that, hey, if you can research something and write about it, go for it. So my books are all really researched, and I'll come up with a topic, like say the Ebola epidemic. And so I researched about it, and then I read tons of articles and books. And then I talked to former neighbor who was a doctor and got his, once I wrote something up about it, like how to treat it, I said, hey, could you look at this and make sure it's correct? So I went to the experts and got their yes, no, okay, let's change this a little bit so that it was correct. And then the rest is kind of just all in your head and you have to figure out, okay, like the dialogues and what do these people say? What does it look like? And sometimes that can almost be harder in a way, or maybe it's just because as of now, I've written so many things that my brain's just kind of like, it hurts. But it can almost be harder to create that stuff. But when you slave away at it, and sometimes it is just, sometimes it's brutal when you're trying to write something and you know you have to do it. Like describing like what the world looks like, or a chapter where it's not really interesting, but you know you have to get on with it. And so once you finally get over that, though, it's fun. So I think it's just like anything in life. You know, there are good days, there are bad days, there are days where you're just like, I'm gonna not even worry about this and put it away, which is really good. Because I learned that if you're really emotional about angry or like happy or sad, you have to put it aside, because then it'll show up in your writing. And at first I didn't understand that, but now when I go back and I look at things that I've written, I'm like, wow, I was really mad, or I was really sad, or I was way too really happy. So it's kind of interesting how you just learn how to do that. And it took me into the second book, so the first book is Fevered Hearts, the second book is Imprisoned Hearts, and that was published in so Fevered Hearts was published in 2018. Imprisoned Hearts was published in 2020, and it took until I was working on Imprisoned Hearts and Shattered Hearts, I kind of worked on them at the same time, for me to really come into myself and find my voice and realize, okay, I can do this.
With regards to the visual impairment, you know, when you're world creating and things like that, being visually impaired from birth, do you find it harder to describe the world around you to someone that is fully sighted, for example, not having known that visual world?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. A lot of times I'll have like sighted friends or family take a look at what I've done, or I'll even have them create stuff for me. So like I've written a couple of novellas, and one of them is this winter country. It's this kind of like Quebec, I guess, or Alaska, where there's snow everywhere. And these people live at the top of a mountain in a resort. And I could not for the life of me figure out how to design this place. And I was like, I can't see the pictures. And I was just having a time of it. And so I asked my friend, I said, hey, can you basically don't plagiarize anything off the internet, because we don't want to do that. But can you look at some pictures and create something for me? Because my brain just can't do it. And she goes, yeah. So she did. She designed the whole thing. And then in another novella that I wrote was kind of in, I guess you could say, like the Middle East or India country. And so it was a library. And again, I asked her, I said, hey, can you do the same thing that you did with that lodge up in the mountains? Could you make me a library? And she goes, absolutely. So I will do that for world building when I can't see the pictures. Also, before we came on here, I was asking you guys, okay, you know, like, what are you wearing in those things? I have that limited idea of what people might look like. And you can't just create, you know, blonde hair, blue-eyed, black hair, brown eye, green eye, brown hair, red hair, blue eye people. And so I will have friends that I ask, and I'll say, hey, can I get your eye color, your hair color, and your height, and write a, you know, make a character after you, because I just can't do it. So it's definitely a lot of asking help from the sighted folk who know what's going on when I have no clue.
I didn't really think of it that way, but that's that's really interesting that you are chatting to people and getting that perspective from them.
Yeah, another thing I had to learn, which was really tough in the beginning, was how to write like a sighted person. That sounds really weird, but I think, as my mentor told me, she's like, as blind people, oh, sorry, just hit my desk. As blind people, we over-describe things, but that's because that's how we live.
Tell that to Tolkien.
Yes, yeah. And so she's like, you have to learn how to write like you can see. And I'm going, what are you talking about? And she goes, you can't over-describe, like if you're in the mountains, you can't over-describe the fact that you're walking on like a spongy forest floor, and then there's rocks and there's sticks and you're stepping on them, and then you smell like the pine trees, and there's like a creepy bee that's following you or something. And she's like, you have to learn how to just describe a little bit and let the reader infer a lot of that into their heads. And sometimes I catch myself in the habit of over describing, and I'm like, wait, gotta take that out, that's way too much. So I guess old habits die hard, huh?
Absolutely. So when it came down to like sort of like the editing side of things, you're using a computer. Like, how did you find that? Because there's a lot of content to get through. And do you use a screen reader, or do you have enough sight to sort of get through it yourself?
Oh, if I had enough sight, no. No, when I look at a Word doc, honestly, all I see is just like white and in the page, and then like this dark blob of something, but it doesn't even look like. If I get up really close, then I can tell that there's double spaced lines, but it just looks dark to me, and I'm just like, I can't even make sense of any of this.
Yeah.
So I use JAWS as the screen reader that I use, and I do as much editing as I can on my own. I will have, again, the sighted folks let me know what's going on. I do have brilliant editors that I pay who do all of that for me, and they're the ones who make me sound like $1,000,000, because when I send the manuscripts to them, oh my goodness, they are disasters, and heaven knows what fonts I've got going on, and if there's really random italicized things, I have no idea. They're like, did you mean to do this? No. So they can tell what needs to be fixed, and then they fix it, and then I go back through and accept what they've done. If they use Gmail or something, like Google Docs, that can pose a little bit of a challenge, so I might have someone who's sighted help me there. But my editor now, she uses Microsoft Word. So I'll just go back through and edit it myself, and that's fine.
So let's say you've got this finished book now that's fully edited.
Mm-hmm.
How did you go about getting it published? Was it more difficult being visually impaired?
I would say maybe a little bit from, a financial aspect, but mainly it was just about choosing which company I wanted to go with and what packages they offered, because I went self-published.
Yeah.
I didn't try to do traditional publishing because that takes a long time, and I wanted to have control over what happened with everything, and I just didn't want to wait and try to get an agent and all of that. So I was looking at Amazon, doing it myself, my publisher Archway Publishing, where they would take the manuscript and the cover and format everything and then upload it to all of the online bookstores like Amazon and Barnes and Noble, etc. Or I was looking at a small indie publisher in Nevada. So I'm in Utah, which is in the western part of the United States, and Nevada is west of Utah, right on the border. So we're right next to each other. And so I was looking at those three, and I ultimately went with Archway because it does cost a little bit more, but I get more bang for my buck, and, they put everything together. And I feel like I had just asked so much of my sighted people that I was just like, if we can just eliminate the need for them to do one more thing for me,
yeah,
let's just go with Archway, because they'll put it all together, and once I send it to them, I really don't have to do anything. They take care of it, which is nice because I can't.
And what's the feedback been like on it? Have you spoken to either anyone, in fact? Well, I guess you must have spoken to people, obviously, but I guess more specifically visually impaired people. Have they read the book? Well, books, I guess, multiple now.
That's an interesting question. I think a few people have, but I haven't really heard much. I think they think that they're good, but I guess it just depends on what genres they like to read. I've mainly heard from a lot of my friends and family who are sighted, who have read them and are like, this is great. So I'm like, okay, I'll keep going. So I kind of just, hopefully, I just want to put them out there. And if anyone wants to read them, go for it. I appreciate it.
When I asked you earlier whether the end goal was to get published or just to sort of write them for you, was the end goal also to make money?
No.
Okay, but I just thought I'd ask the question. Sometimes authors literally write to make money, or bands release albums to make money. That's
George R. R. Martin's been writing for money for years.
Well, no, he hasn't. That's the thing.
HBO made him a money printing machine.
He's not had to write for years and still got paid.
Yeah,
but yeah.
The thing is, and this is the why I have another job. I did a lot of research going into this, and so I knew that even before I even, signed with my publisher and found my editor and everything, I'd done a lot of research and learned that when you self-publish these days, you can make money, but it's not going to pay the bills. So I always went into this thinking, okay, this is a side thing and it's more for fun. And if people like it, that's great. And for now, I was lucky enough to get a job proofreading Braille. And so that pays the bills and allows me to do everything. And then the writing is just fun because I don't have a family yet and it's just me. So I'm like, if it's just me, I'm going to, live it up right now. So
makes sense. Yeah. Young and free and all of that.
Exactly.
So as far as sort of any other sort of hurdles, like we've covered a few things about how sort of like visual impairment can have an impact on like the editing and that side of things. I mean, do you feel like being a blind author, like it was harder for you than a sighted author, like as far as process and getting yourself out there?
I guess the one thing I felt when I went into this was when I first got into writing the book with my mentor, she had published her first book, had a blind character, and I didn't want to follow her because I felt like that would have been copying her.
Yeah.
And I wanted to prove to myself really and everyone else that, hey, I can write really well and the character doesn't have to be blind.
Yeah.
So I wanted to establish myself and do a few books and then the children's books before I wrote my first blind character. And that book's actually coming out this year with my first blind character. And I felt like I could finally talk about it a lot more because I have established myself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's sort of like the old adage that, write what you know, isn't it? Like if you write from lived experience, and that's what a lot of authors would recommend. And I think Stephen King even says that, write from lived experience as best you can. But then, like you said there, then you wanted to prove that your lived experience is very different to sort of majority of people. So you wanted to prove that you can be, you can write outside of those constraints. And you've had a trilogy of books which haven't had sort of your lived experience in there. And that's great. Like that you've got that validation that you can do that and not have to go, to the easy lane of, oh, let's pull from that because that's something I know and I can do this better than anyone.
So true.
If you had any advice throughout your journey for any other person who was looking to become an author, and let's say they have a disability and they're thinking, oh, I can't do that. Do you have any advice sort of like from what you've found which makes things easier or will better prepare someone?
I would say do a lot of research and just find your niche, whatever genre you want to write about. Make sure you kind of know the ins and outs. So read books or articles and just learn the business as much as you can. Start writing, obviously. A lot of people kind of get stuck there. They're like, I don't know what to write. And my best advice is just start writing. It doesn't matter if it's a mess because everything I do is an absolute tragedy. It's horrible. Like I'll read something and I'm like, geez, I think I just repeated myself. Why did I do that? What did I say? What? Okay, switching verb tenses from present to past, back to present. What are you doing? So it's going to be a train wreck, and that's perfectly fine. But the most important thing is just start writing, and then, you can always fix it up with an editor later. One thing that comes to mind is actually there was a book I had read a few years ago called The Banyan Tree by Christopher Nolan, I think is his name. And he was from Ireland, and he had some kind of disability. I can't remember if it was what it was, but he couldn't really move he was paralyzed basically. And he used the eye tracking software that they have, and he wrote this whole book. And I read it and I was amazed. I was like, holy cow, this guy had so many ideas in his head, and he wrote it with the eye tracking software that obviously I can't use. But it was amazing. And so I would honestly just say to anyone who wants to do this, go for it.
And welcome back.
Damn it, I was going to say that.
Well, you can say it now.
No.
Go on, say it.
And we're back.
Good. Are you happy now?
No, it felt forced.
Because it was, entirely. Well, there is some literary prowess from a published author, so hopefully you enjoyed that.
Also, if you're interested in Macy's books, there'll be a midweek bonus episode coming out where Macy talks more about the books that are coming out and what you can expect for them. So check that out if it's something you're interested in.
I really enjoyed this chat with Macy. It was really good to have someone in the literary space. That's like that word.
Literary?
Yeah.
Or space?
Both. Depends what space we're talking about, like indoors or outer.
I concur. Until next week, folks.
Yep, stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to Seesaw Podcast. Your feedback and comments mean a lot to us, so if you'd like to get in touch, you can do so in the following ways.
You can find us on Twitter at Seesaw Pod, Facebook, Instagram and YouTube at Seesaw Podcast. And you can also join us at seesawpodcast.com. Remember to like, rate, review us and share us with a friend. This podcast was recorded in front of a blind audience.